Ladies and gentlemen, can you hear us? Okay. I think what you just saw there was a good example of how companies approach ESG and compliance. We were all sitting here waiting for someone to tell us what to do, whereas actually we needed to get up and pick up the microphone and manage it ourselves. So quite a good introduction to a subject which I think my panelists and myself, and hopefully you in this room, think should be on the big stage with a big audience. As it is, we're in the smaller room on the side, discussing a subject that is central to businesses. A lot of acronyms in this, so ESG, SaaS, B2B, and we're looking at compliance to competitive advantage. I'm David Johnson, editor-at-large for Madiness. I run the English language content. So I've come from London to Paris, obviously on the Eurostar. It's more environmentally friendly. And I'm delighted to say it's my first time at Station F, or Station F, as I heard a French person call it, which I thought was quite unique. It really is great to be here at this sort of mythical landmark place for the French and European ecosystem. And I'm delighted to be joined by some of the great and good startups and scale-ups from France. We weren't going to do introductions, but I think it's quite a nice small room. Maybe each of you could introduce yourselves very quickly. That way we can get used to you guys passing the microphone between yourselves. So Guilhem.
Sure, I'm Guilhem Isaac George. I'm the VP of Impact at Contentsquare. If you don't know Contentsquare, that's already quite big scale-up, 1,700 employees across the world, present in 16 countries. We're running a SaaS business, providing web analytics for customers, very different customers, but with a strong vertical on e-commerce.
I'm Tailleferd. I'm the CMO at Deepki. And at Deepki, we are 400 people, so a little bit smaller than Contentsquare. We are an ESG by design company, meaning our mission is to help our customers from the real estate industry achieve their net zero strategies. We're operating in 60 countries through 5 or 6 offices.
And Laetitia.
Oh, I didn't know if I should take yours or this one.
I get to hold on to this one.
Okay,
I think
perfect.
that's cute.
So my name is Laetitia Carle. I'm the CEO of Greenly. So Greenly, we are a carbon management platform, and we're expanding towards ESG with the upcoming regulations such as CSRD.
Fantastic. So great example of businesses that are built around ESG and some that have had to adapt, I suppose, towards it. I think we're all united by a desire for a sustainable future, sustainable in terms of the planet, people, but also in terms of business growth. For startups, I think they're in a unique position because they can start from the beginning with ESG requirements built into the DNA of the business. But I wanted to think about your journey in ESG, where it should start, how it begins. And Guilhem, maybe you could talk a little bit about how that started for Contentsquare.
Sure. So Contentsquare has been created in 2012 and really became a SaaS business, I would say, in 2014. And until 2020, ESG was not really a concern. But it came first with some pressure from our customers, actually. When you grow and you start to become a bigger supplier for certain customers, could quote L'Oréal, for example, if you exceed 500K of business with L'Oréal annually, you are in a different track as a supplier, and you need to disclose more and more ESG data, and you can't anymore leave big blanks in their ESG questionnaire. Otherwise, you're just ejected. So it really started like that. Then we faced some more pressure from our investors. We had different funding rounds, notably one in 2021 with 500 million, with more institutional investors. And so necessarily at some point, they were also more focused on ESG data. And so we had at this time to disclose more ESG data, and that's when the management came to hire some people for specific ESG position in the company. And then ultimately, it also came with the regulation. When I joined Contentsquare, that was already a unicorn, but I was pretty surprised not to find any sustainability report or any public information about sustainability of this company. It was already way above the threshold for mandatory ESG reporting. But as we are, and we still are, an SaaS under French law, that was a way to escape somehow any obligation. So anyway, we decided in 2022 to publish our first sustainability report, even if we were not obliged to, but we considered that with the new European regulation that was coming, called the CSRD, that you might heard about, that was interesting to start already to disclose something, to get ready for 3 years later to really report in this new, very demanding framework. So that's where we are now.
Okay, it's very interesting. So I think interesting to ask Laetitia from her side, as a startup that was built in response to ESG requirements, so rather than having to make these changes because of the requirements of investors and clients, Laetitia, you've built your business around these requirements. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and maybe also share at what point the ESG discussion should be had at a startup?
Yes, absolutely. So I think, like, talking about our company, but mostly like those of our customers, we see exactly the reason that Guilhem gave as the main reason why they start engaging in ESG strategy. A couple are missing. The first one is the one that pushes us to get a real ESG strategy internally and not only for our customers. It's the pressure from our employees. Because obviously everybody joining Greenly is very, very motivated by sustainability, etc. So for them, it was super important that we walk the talk. So, you know, like our main impact is the way we help our customers, is when we help them measure their emissions, reduce, etc. That's our impact. But they wanted more. They wanted real ESG metrics, tracking, data, etc. So we built all that for our employees. And another reason that why companies come to us is on financing. You talked about investment funds, but it also happens with loans. So, for example, we work with BNP Paribas, who offers discounts on the loans for companies who measure and reduce their emissions. So there are many, many reasons why customer comes to us. And to your question on when, I think the easier is to start as early as possible, because when you have everything set up, it's hard to do it basically when you start and you have a full company that's running and you need to change everything. If you start at the beginning, you won't have many metrics, you won't have a lot of stuff to disclose, etc. But at least it's natively in your processes. So to give a stupid example, but for our carbon accounting, we need to track the number of planes, the number of trains, the number of hotels we're doing every year. If you start at some point where you have like millions of expenses of travel and accommodations in your P&L, it's going to be hard to go deep dive and look at each bill and know what it is. While what we did from the beginning is track it every time it's in our validation processes. So, you know, like when you book a plane, you have to go on our procurement platform to ask finance to validate the expense, and you have to put it on the Greenly platform so that it's already saved for when we do our annual reports. And so all of these processes are easier to make at the beginning. So it's never too early to get into something. So even if you're a very small startup and you don't have much impact on the planet at your stage, putting everything in place since the beginning will be of a tremendous help for when you become a unicorn like Contentsquare.
I think that's a really good example, as well as of how to get everyone involved in the mission. I think the important thing with ESG is it's not any one person's role within a company. Everyone is a stakeholder in it. And an initiative like that, where everyone is part of the process, sounds very beneficial. Caroline, have you found any other ways? I'm sure everyone at Deepki is likewise greenly committed to the planet, but any other great examples of getting people involved?
So, of course, they're very committed, and of course, we drink our own champagne, so we report, etc., we track. But and on top of that, we have a great CSR committee, and they're organizing plenty of things. So it creates a lot of adherence to the mission, and initiatives are like various. I think that was last week. There was a cleaning day in Germany. They went to clean a park. So that's an initiative. We also have initiatives around waste management. We are growing vegetables on our rooftop. So some people cleaned a beach in another location of ours. So there's a lot of things that people really are motivated to adhere to. And sometimes the challenge is not to create adoption. The challenge is to create more focus and say, okay, we are all sharing the same DNA, and the focus of the company is the business. Good news, our business is a virtuous circle, and the more we do business, the more we decarbonize.
Yes, so I suppose avoid the pitfall of creating too much work for people by having ESG initiatives internally. You mentioned working with the clients and more business creates more decarbonisation. Do you find yourselves having to convince the large corporates that you're working with? Any good strategies for how to talk to them?
Multi-stakeholder engagement, I would say. So we are working with large companies. They would always have somewhat or somehow a head of ESG. Of course, that's an entry point, and that's a lot of inbound for us. But they don't need to be convinced. They're the advocate of it internally in their own companies, and what we are trying to do with them is generating adoption across the other C-level functions. And so what we are seeing at the moment is that ESG is not a departmental topic anymore. It is everywhere, and it's a topic for the board and not for a communication department, for instance.
Fantastic. And Guilhem, likewise from your experience coming in where there was no ESG policy in place, any landmark moments in your career that you can share that were great sort of moments of federation, bring people together and success associated?
Yeah, first, I would lie if I was telling you that today our 1,700 employees are all on board. That's not the case. That's an ongoing effort. You have, on a day-to-day basis, to give them information, to implement good internal communication campaigns, to organize events, to implement good trainings. Trainings are a really good example. I think we tried in the past to propose some very theoretical trainings on the low carbon transition, for example. It didn't work, absolutely didn't work. But when we came with another training really focused on our own carbon footprint and how we deal to reduce it, it worked. So something that is focused on your company and also something that is linked somehow to the day-to-day activity of the people in your company is really important. Other thing I think is extremely important, above all, your execs and your top management has to be involved. If they're not so embodying this commitment to sustainability, it won't work because it appears that it's not in the company's priorities. So that's extremely important. And then I would say the last thing that I think that's really important too is to really involve your people in your activities, give them responsibilities. At Contentsquare, we started something pretty interesting. That was 6 months ago. We created what we call impact OKRs. So you all know probably OKRs. And we designed that as an extra OKR that you can ask your manager to take. If he agrees, then you have a guaranteed time to work on an impact project. It gives you, for example, 2 hours per week to work on that. And it will contribute also to your performance evaluation at the end of the quarter. And so somehow that contributes to incentivize people to get responsibilities on that. And that's also about giving them visibility. And that we are trying to do through our sustainability report. So for an external public, but also for an internal public. I think that's some key elements are really interesting to manage.
Okay, fantastic. We're going to have to move on to the word that I think might be the turn-off for this this panel, which is compliance. Associated regulation is changing. It can be overwhelming for a small team, for a big team. Guilhem, maybe you can enlighten us out as to how compliance can be seen as giving a competitive advantage.
Well, first I would say that ESG as a a great power as it forces you to make a diagnosis of your activity from a different standpoint. It will contribute to analyze what you're doing with KPIs that are not exactly the usual business KPIs. And sometimes it will help you to identify some blind spots. Just to give you an example, at Contentsquare, we used to have a very generous travel policy. And when we've put in perspective the CO2 emission that was representing and the efforts we had to do to reach our annual targets, at this point, we said, well, the travel policy is probably way too generous, and we decided to change it to something much more sober. And that's also very linked to some savings you can do at some point. And arguments are converging on different ESG and financial topics. So I think that's a good way to align business and ESG efforts.
Thank you. Caroline, anything to add on the regulatory landscape and how that can give an opportunity for startups?
Definitely. So Europe is leading on the ESG front. That's really important to notice. There's a massive business opportunity there. European regulations are an opportunity for European startups and scale-ups in their domestic markets to support the transition of existing economic players, but also to create by design sustainable companies. And also that's an opportunity for us Europeans to lead the way. And for instance, at Deepki, we are much bigger, like twice bigger than our main US competitor. And really there's an opportunity there because US are a bit late, but when they want to catch up with the topic, they catch up very fast. They're very agile. So there's a window of opportunity which is amazing right now for funders and for companies who really want to succeed in that field. For instance, at Deepki, we have global customers, and so those global customers, they have like operations, offices, and buildings across the globe. And what they're doing, even though they're sometimes American customers, they comply or they set the standards aligned with European regulations. Because it is more simple when you have a portfolio of assets across the globe to select one regulation that matches everywhere, and so that's really giving us a competitive advantage, and there's an opportunity for the European business there.
So it's great to hear this global opportunity for European businesses. Laetitia, we will often think of startups of being ahead of the curve, kind of the vanguard of innovation. ESG is not there, it's established now, but I wonder if you can talk about what startups can do to do more with this potential of ESG.
Yes, so indeed, as Caroline said, it's a big opportunity to work with customers where companies who are less agile and are not adapting to these ESG trends could be late. And the American companies are great examples because we have a quarter of our business from the US. And when we see like the market, it's surprising because they are much less mature, they are much less interested in the topic. But business is business for them. And when a customer like Airbnb or Walmart says by 2030, I want 10% of emission reductions from all my suppliers, otherwise you're out, they have a lot less pity than the French who are a bit nice, saying like, okay, you have until 2025 and we can rediscuss it, etc. So agility in putting in place these processes is a key. And we are lucky to have the CSRD with the most complex and exigent set of rules, because once we have done everything at CSRD level, we actually have done a big part of a lot of other frameworks. So for example, this week I was doing your CDP. So CDP is a supply chain disclosure program where you can put your data in there, and then you will be on their website as a CDP approved. And the questions are the same as CSRD. So I had done everything for CSRD, and now I just had to take my answers of CSRD and put them in CDP. And it's the same thing for a lot of frameworks like EcoVadis, SBTi, etc. And so whenever regulations come up, if you have done the harder one, so the CSRD, you've already done most of the job. So now the question is how you can put this data in all these different frameworks, and so that's why having them on the platform, which is kind of the single source of truth for your company, is key, because then you answer all the questions once, and then you can export it with different formats and even RFPs from your customers that I'm sure you've gotten a lot if you're working with the L'Oréal of the world, but they're going to ask you a lot of questions about all of your policies, etc. So answering to all of this only once is a huge lifesaver.
That's a great example. Thank you for showing how, by being compliant, you are getting yourself ahead of the curve, ready, able to respond to clients and other regulations almost instantly, because you've laid the groundwork. Guilhem, any examples from Contentsquare of how your journey through ESG has given tangible business growth at Contentsquare?
Yeah, I think a pretty good one. Fully agree with my two co-speakers. Europe is really leading the way. And not only with the CSRD, I mean, with the Green Deal, we had on the past years very ambitious legislation on different fronts. And that's the case for customer transparency, for example. So you have more and more products that, for being sold in Europe, need to display more and more environmental data. That's the case for textile, for appliances, electronics, tires, batteries, whatever. So our customers have to deal with these new obligations. And at some point, we ask ourselves if we could have an added value, bringing them new insights about how their customers behave with this new transparency obligation. And so we've been finding ways to use our solution differently to analyze these behaviors and know that works. And we're selling that to customers. That's a new use case that is pretty popular at Contentsquare.
Okay, fantastic. And you touched on international growth, Caroline, and operating in more than 60 countries. Can you talk about your ESG journey with that in international expansion?
Definitely. So when we talk scale and growth and ESG at the same time, you could think, well, scale and growth is not too compatible with ESG because, for instance, with the traditional economy, to scale and grow, you will need to produce more phones or sell more clothing or things like that. When you create a company that is sustainable by design, the more you grow, the more you do business with your customers, and the more you benefit the planet, the more you have a positive impact. So that's also why not only there's a window of opportunity from a business perspective, but that's also a very regenerative kind of business that can be created. And that's a question that you could ask yourself: is my business Paris Agreement proof? Is my business 2050 approved? Is my business supporting a transition, but also benefiting from the growth of people who are selling phones? Or is my business able to grow even though in many years we will maybe sell less phones?
Thank you. I think I'd like to ask this next question to each of you. So maybe Caroline, you start. Why do you think Europe is or has the potential to be the leader in the ESG space?
Not only because of regulations. There's regulations, that's for sure. They're complicated to understand, so there's a big potential for creating a lot of startups to help people comply with those regulations. That's really a first thing. But the second thing is that probably in Europe we can feel people, like the general public, is more aware of those concerns, and so it creates a domestic market that is more mature and that is easier to access for early stage startups. So that's also like a positive ecosystem.
Fantastic. Guilhem, same question. What makes Europe special or what makes ESG special in Europe?
Well, that's very true. This very common analysis on US versus Europe. US creates and Europe creates legislation. And that's true. But obviously, with this advance in ESG regulation, there is a huge opportunity for European startups to take markets. And we have great examples of startups. Greenly is one, but we have plenty of great initiatives with super business models that have a real future, even in the US, I think. And Deepki is another great example. I mean, what you said about your market in the US is crazy. That's a great success story. But we can say, on the other hand, that the US is way far on everything on ESG. I mean, we recently acquired a company from the Silicon Valley, and we quickly understood that their expectation on diversity and inclusion was way beyond our. And so we had to adapt also. If climate is not directly on the first topics for Americans today, diversity and inclusion is. And you also have big differences, even if we have more or less the same regulation. Just to give you an example, on digital accessibility. Digital accessibility, it's always worth to remind everyone that worldwide, 1 billion people live with disability, and 70% of the web content are still not accessible. So for that, there are regulations in many countries. That's the case in the US and in Europe. They are pretty much the same, but the enforcement is very different. As in the US, you have this mechanism of class action lawsuits, for example. The penalties, the financial penalties, are much higher than in Europe. So companies are implementing this regulation while in Europe they're not. So sometimes you think you have the best regulation, but the enforcement is not there.
It also goes to show what a broad subject this is. This is beyond environment. You touched on diversity and inclusion. Small anecdote, because I witnessed this in a large unnamed French fashion house involved in their HR. They couldn't believe, or the French managing director of the HR department couldn't believe that her American-based president or VP of HR had requests from her staff across the board for mental health days. This was a request she was fielding on a daily basis in the States, and in the Paris HQ, she just couldn't even see the issue, the concept. So yes, again, the need for the startup agility and the mindset of openness to adapt. Laetitia, from your side, anything that is, I must say, I was kind of expecting more sort of deeply philosophical French answers to the question of why Europeans are committed to ESG, but Laetitia, maybe you can share some.
Yeah, no, I think you said a lot about like the general perception, but this leads to something else, which is education. In France, we have the best engineers in terms of climate, etc. And yeah, as you mentioned, ESG is not all about environment. There's also the social and governance, but at least in the environment, we have amazing programs, and and our schools are creating a lot of scientists, experts on these topics. So that gives us a huge advantage. For example, when we compete with American companies, they have to pay their climate engineers 3 times to 10 times what we pay them in France, because there's a scarcity of those profiles, and also it's American prices. So when we go out in the US with a product built by French tech engineers and French climate engineers, we are super competitive just in terms of pricing. So that's, I think, a big difference. And it comes from the fact that, yeah, we are more mature on environmental topics in Europe. But it's also, yeah, if we take the S, the social part, the US are much in advance. And also that might be a problem why ESG struggles to get into the US, because when we look at Trump, for example, and he says like, yeah, all the ESG topics are something to be thrown out or extra, it's because they're only thinking like, yeah, people want more diversity, they are woke, so they see like ESG as something which is really about people, about race, about gender, etc. So it's in a fight that we've been fighting since a long time. While in Europe, when we think ESG, we think more about environment and climate, and so it's something much more consensual. So I think that might be maybe a bit more philosophical difference between the US and France.
It was. I like it. The idea of it being a consensual subject, not a polarizing subject.
Exactly.
Keen to give people some actionable takeaways. I think you guys are equipped to do that. Laetitia, maybe thinking for a startup with limited resources, is there a solid strategy or certain aspects of ESG that they should focus on rather than trying to do everything?
Yeah, I mean, putting some things in place like policies, which are honestly something that you can write from online templates, etc. So there's a lot of things that you can do without spending too much money or anything. It's really about turning your company, turning your top management also, and focusing them on those things, and a lot will be done from there. So, you know, when you think about gender equality, like just thinking about it and putting processes in place which are very standard to make sure that you don't have a bias in recruitment or stuff like that. That's really easy things to do that don't cost much. But then it also depends on what you need to do for your customers, for your employees, etc. And today, with technology, what's great is that we don't have to pay anymore thousands of man hours at KPMG or Capgemini to put together a climate strategy. We have a lot of tools. So for example, Deepki or us, or in HR, across all ESG, you have a lot of tools to monitor and pilot your strategy, which makes it much cheaper.
So don't be scared about the costs. Use productivity tools and lay the foundations.
Exactly, yeah.
Guilhem, any actionable nuggets of wisdom you can share?
Yeah, I have to say I was fully aligned with what you said earlier, Laetitia. Start as early as you can. When you grow, it will become harder and harder to implement all you're going to have to implement. So even if it's small at the beginning, if you just have part-time people on ESG topics, if you just have some consulting for some hours, it really helps. Then when you are already big, it will cost you much more than if you tried that before. And my second advice would be to really look at your existing activities, not try to imagine new developments of your business model. Try to stay the closest possible of your existing value prop, and try to understand what can evolve to tweak for more sustainable practices. And probably staying the closest possible of your business KPIs, you're going to have a better understanding from all your stakeholders.
Okay, great. And Caroline, anything that you can inspire sort of startups to leverage their commitment to ESG to help win more business?
Definitely. So when we talk ESG or sustainability, now more and more people think about businesses who can really grow in that space. It is recent, but it is important to believe that there's a real business opportunity. So I heard something, it's not from me, but I heard it this morning in this room, someone saying like building a business in the ESG or sustainable field, it doesn't have to be climate, it could be biodiversity, it could be a lot of things, it doesn't have to be tech. As well, there are many things to do, but try to do something that a climate skeptical person would buy. So you were at this one table, and I really loved it, because definitely the way to leverage this window of opportunity is to run real businesses with real business plans.
And I think that's one of the important sort of things to remember about ESG. It is creating new industries, new jobs, new revenue streams. Now, my last question for the three of you, would you like me to open the floor to questions from the audience? Yeah? We've got a few minutes, so if anyone has any questions, I'll have to run up to you with a microphone. So I'd rather it was the people in the front than the back. But if anyone has any questions, oh, you can actually, yeah, thank you.
Well, we did that. We're currently doing that at Contentsquare. I think that's a pretty helpful tool to mobilize your people, as it's really linked to their existing preoccupations. And so that really contributes to embark people on your journey. So we have 4 at Contentsquare currently, 1 on disabilities, 1 on multicultural, 1 on women, and another 1 on, don't remember, but anyway, and that they're not all active at the same level, I would say, but some are really active, and that really mobilizes people. So I'm quite a fan of ERGs, to be honest.
We had a similar experience at Madiness, and I found it was just added workload. I think it's because I was operating sort of externally to the team remotely. It was, and I think in the early days it was perceived as, this is something else I now have to be involved with. Of course, I think we used a strategy of actually making it quite fun and making subjects that was led by the staff involved, asking them what they wanted to do to make change. At that point, people got a little bit more kind of excited to be involved, but it definitely did add to the hours in the working day for people.
I'm part of the multicultural, for example, and it really started to work when we created a cookbook, and the outcome was amazing. So most of the people were, wow, what we did. And so it really helped to make that more concrete.
What do clients need to do to get the Contentsquare cookbook?
Good point. We should put that on our website and make it available, yeah?
Any other questions? Well, in that case, I think I can thank you all for being here, and more importantly, thank you to my guests this afternoon. Thank you all.
Thank you.